The ancient Indian texts mention beautifully decorated chariots or entire palaces called vimmanas that could take off and, in a matter of seconds, fly away as far as space. Some people believe these vimmanas only existed in Indian mythology, but it's also possible that they were based on a real technology that had been lost over the centuries. According to the Vedas, ancient Indian religious texts, there was the elephant vimana with several engines and many other types named after animals and birds. There was one for local travel, one for visiting different countries, and one for traveling to the moon and various planets. They could develop a great speed. One vimana had the superpower of invisibility. Another one was shaped like a sphere and was built on the winds produced by Mercury. This vimana was said to generate an enormous ray like the sun and make noise like the storm's thunder. All the vimanas were unbreakable and perfect for attacks on foes. Now, to operate a vimana, you'd need to know a lot of stuff, pretty much like today's airplane pilots, 32 secrets in total. They'd cover the aircraft structure and the secrets of taking off and maneuvering without crashing. That's a good thing. The pilot was also expected to know how to be seen and unseen, how to be hidden, how to be quick, how to manage contractions and expansion, and many other tricks. To hide the flying machine from foes, the pilot was instructed to move to the 8th atmospheric layer above the Earth and use the power of dark solar rays. This instruction might sound a bit weird, but there were others, more realistic ones, which still make sense in modern aeronautics. There are sections of ancient texts on the vimanas that focus on details like flight paths, pilot training, navigation, and even suitable clothes for pilots and recommended food for long flights. There was also a lot of technical detail about the use of heat-absorbing metals, the metals utilized, and melting points. The supporters of the theory that the vimanas were more than just myths are sure that the ancient Indians would unlikely go into all these details just for a beautiful story. So, the flying palaces might have been real and way ahead of their time, like many other great Indian inventions. Back in the 6th century BCE, an Indian physician named Sushruta basically wrote the original guide to medicine and surgery. They even called him the father of surgery for his work. Sushruta laid down the details on hundreds of medicinal plants and described complex surgical procedures. He gave instructions on nose reconstructions and skin transplants from one part of the body to another. The original method of rhinoplasty, which involved taking a piece of skin from the forehead to reconstruct the nose, is still used today. But back then, it had a slightly different purpose than surprising your followers on social media. Those nose jobs helped out folks who had lost their noses as punishment for crimes or in fights. Now, you gotta thank an ancient Indian math prodigy for the invention of zero. It might not seem like a big deal, but without it, we would have no binary system and no computers. People before the 5th century CE were only thinking about some sort of a sign to indicate nothing. The invention made addition, subtraction, and other mathematical operations a whole lot easier. You can see the oldest zero in existence carved in the wall of a temple in Gwalior, India. The Indus Valley Civilization was using rulers in 1500 BCE and earlier. Made from ivory, these rulers were found during excavations in what is present-day Pakistan and northwestern India. They were widely used in architecture with amazing accuracy. They had units corresponding to slightly over 1 inch that were marked with precise subdivisions within 5/1000ths of an inch. The next invention is more of a concept than a physical item. Standardization is all about setting the rules based on a bunch of people, things, or interests. One of its cool applications that we've all gotten used to is standard weights. Whether you're using pounds or kilograms, you need these universal measurements for weight, right? For this, we owe a big shout-out to the merchants from the Indus Valley Civilization who lived around 4,000 years ago. They were measuring everything from food grains to fancy luxury goods using these standardized weights. And their weights had decimal and binary mathematical systems going on. They didn't have high-tech gear. but they pulled off some serious precision using complex calculations and even sand for construction. Their art of standardization made its way to Persia and Central Asia, basically becoming the global weight-watching standard. So if yoga is your go-to exercise, you definitely have a personal reason to appreciate the ancient Indian geniuses. Over 5,000 years ago, during the rule of the Indus Sarasvati civilization in northern India, yoga was first mentioned in the Vedas. Yoga was refined and shaped over the centuries until it grew into a massive teaching with over 200 sacred writings dedicated to this way of obtaining enlightenment. At the beginning of the current era, yoga got a new trajectory thanks to a Hindu writer who laid down a system of yoga in his text, the Yoga Sutras. It became a whole-body rejuvenation, a life-extending practice with poses that you are still doing on the mat today. Yoga has reached the Western world only in the 19th century, and it caught on like wildfire. Chess, the all-time top game for intellectuals, is also an Indian invention. Its ancestor was called Chaturanga, and it was a strategic board game that started gaining popularity around 3,000 years before the current era. This early Indian version of chess was played by 4 people, not 2, and had 64 squares. Each player had 8 pieces, ranging from pawns to kings, bishops to knights, and there was no standard 6-faced dice. They rolled with an oblong one. Players facing off were actually allies, forming 2 teams based on the direction they sat. Chess, that we know and love today, was first mentioned in ancient Indian literature in a legend. It said that the wife of a villain called Ravana had invented the game to amuse him. Now, the word shampoo comes from the Hindi word, which means to soothe or knead. The substance was invented in India in 1762 and was originally used for head massages, hence the name. The first shampoo was made of natural oils and herbs. British traders fell in love with the idea and brought it back with them to England. It took years for the original head massage oil to evolve into shampoo as we know it today, but it's still an Indian invention. Unlike the ancient Greeks, who wore animal skins, the Indians started cultivating cotton back in the 5th and 4th centuries before the current era. They used cotton threads to produce fabrics that soon became a huge hit in the Mediterranean and beyond. Jute and wool also have their origins in India. Cashmere, the finest and most exclusive type of wool, actually comes from the Kashmir region of India. Buttons that sit proudly on that cashmere cardigan of yours also have ancient Indian origins. Some 5,000 years ago, the Indus Valley civilization started cutting seashells into geometric shapes with tiny holes in them. First, they were just decorations, but then people started using them to fasten clothes. Now, when you think about radio communication pioneers, Marconi's name usually steals the spotlight. He got a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1909 for his groundbreaking radio work. But there's an unsung hero in the radio waves game, and his name is Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose. He spilled the beans on radio communication way back in 1895. He shot an electromagnetic wave across 75 feet at the town hall in Calcutta, and it went through walls, rang a bell, and even set off some gunpowder. Marconi took a page from Bose's book, using his invention, the Mercury Coherer, as a blueprint for his own two-way radio. Bose didn't patent his genius creation, so he only got his credit a century later.
Stonehenge wasn't a witchy monument to travel through time. It was actually constructed as a hope to build a different future. Recent research just found out that the monument was probably raised as an attempt to reunite the Britons during a period of big division. The thread of this story lies on the altar stone, the monument's most iconic rock. For years, scientists believed that the stones used in Stonehenge, including the altar stone, came from the nearby Preseli Hills in Wales. In this scenario, Stonehenge would have been built by a local community, that is, Neolithic people who would have found easy-to-access materials to build a ceremonial mound, a sundial calendar, and a final resting place, all in one. Things changed when another discovery was made. In 2018, leading-edge research pointed that the altar stone actually came from the River Tay region in northeastern Scotland, which is located over 400 miles away from Stonehenge. Scientists found similar rocks as such in Scottish monuments. You see, the altar stone is a recumbent stone, laying on its side. Many of the rocks were found in ceremonial stone circles in Scotland, and they are unique to this region. When this discovery broke through, it got archaeologists thinking. Maybe Stonehenge wasn't just a local project, but a wider collaboration between different tribes and communities across Britain. To understand this, we need to rewind to around 3000 BCE. That's when Britain still wasn't a unified country per se. Rather, it was a patchwork of tribes such as those coming from southern or eastern Europe, each with their own customs and beliefs. As an island, Britain's population changed many times. Britain was mainly composed of farmers who descended from people from the Middle East and arrived on the land around 6,000 years ago. This group thrived in the area until 2500 BCE, when another group coming from the regions of the Netherlands and Germany started to appear. These ones, also known as the Beaker people, were responsible for the large population turnover that Britain experienced during the Neolithic period and the years that followed. The Beakers were called so because of a specific type of pottery they used to make and bury their loved ones with after their passing. It's possible that the original dwellers of the land didn't like it that their land was being repopulated. And what researchers suggest is that Stonehenge was this attempt to reunite the original Neolithic farmer population and regain some type of identity control over their land. They would have invested a lot of time and energy in bringing the altar stone all the way down from Scotland, without the help of wheel technology, for example. You see, the wheel had already been invented in Lower Mesopotamia, but since there was no Wi-Fi at the time, the Brits weren't aware of this technology until much later on. This whole territorial crisis could have driven locals to use their resources to move the altar stone to Salisbury Plain in England, in order to reunify the land. You see, Stonehenge wasn't built in one go. Its history dates to around 3000 BCE. That's when the monument was just a circular ditch and bank, known as a henge. Inside, they placed wooden posts and possibly totem-like carvings. This version of Stonehenge wasn't about rocks yet. It was more of a ritualistic place and possibly a final resting place. They found several cremation pits from this period, making it the oldest resting place in all of Britain. It was only around 2600 BCE that the blue stones came around. The naming might be a bit misleading since they're not literally blue rocks. They have a bluish tinge to them when they're freshly broken, hence the name. These smaller rocks probably came from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, which is about 150 miles away from Stonehenge. Some researchers say that the ancient ones believed that blue stones had healing qualities. So we can maybe guess why they went through all of the trouble to move them from Wales to Salisbury Plains, huh? A little bit later than that, circa 2500, that's when we start having the Stonehenge we know and love today. That's when the Sarsen stones started to arrive. The Sarsens are Stonehenge's huge stones. I mean, each Sarsen can weigh around 25 tons. That's as much as 3 African elephants stacked together. The Sarsens make that iconic outer ring circle. Supposedly, that's also when the altar stone was moved from Scotland directly to the heart of Stonehenge. The altar stone is the largest of the blue stones used to build Stonehenge. Today, the altar stone lies recumbent at the foot of the largest trilithon of the monument. In case you don't know, the trilithons are the horizontal stones used to form those famous arches we see today. And here's where the story takes a twist. For nearly a century, scientists believe that the altar stone came from the same area as the blue stones, the Preseli Hills in Wales. It made sense back then. If you're already hauling stones from Wales, why not grab a special one to be the so-called altar? Except that theory started crumbling in 2018, when a team of researchers decided to dig deeper. They used advanced geochemical analysis to pinpoint where the altar stone's sandstone actually came from, and it turns out it wasn't Wales. Instead, the results pointed north, specifically to the Orcadian Basin in northeastern Scotland, 400 miles from Stonehenge. This revelation changed the whole script of Stonehenge's story. How would they move the rocks, you may ask? Well, there's an old theory known as the ice road that suggests that the rocks were moved by natural icy pathways that formed during the winter. This way, they could slide the rocks down all the way to Stonehenge. But hey, if we're talking about a distance of over 100 miles, that's not too realistic. Anyways, this theory was debunked because it was warmer back then than it is today. There's also the river theory that suggests that the rocks were floating along the river from the quarry to the site. But if we're talking about sarsen rocks, they're too heavy to float. So there goes this theory. What we're saying is, no one knows how the rocks were moved. Another interesting info came from all the research done in Stonehenge. A recent laser survey of the stones revealed the different stone working methods used and has shown that some parts of the monument were more carefully finished than others. In particular, the northeast side and the inner faces of the central trilithons were finely dressed. FYI, a trilithon is one of Stonehenge's most famous shapes. It's when two huge monoliths receive a third one on top of them, connecting the two together. This fancy word is just Greek for having three stones. But anyway, the bigger question, and maybe why Stonehenge is so famous, is why it was built in the first place. You see, Stonehenge's entire layout seems to have been carefully planned to align with the movements of the sun. The monument's architecture is particularly attuned to the solstices, the shortest and longest days of the year. During the summer solstice, the sun rises perfectly in line with the heel stone, casting light straight into the heart of the stone circle. A spectacular, almost magical sight that surely wowed its ancient audience. But it's the midwinter solstice that seems to hold a special connection to the altar stone. As the sun sets on that day, its light aligns with the altar stone at the center of Stonehenge. To the builders of Stonehenge, this alignment may have symbolized more than just celestial precision. It likely carried profound ancestral and spiritual significance. The altar stone, illuminated by the setting sun, could have been seen as a bridge between worlds, connecting the living with their ancestors, the earth with the cosmos, and the present with the eternal. In a world without calendars, clocks, or weather apps, the solstices were everything. They marked the rhythm of life, guiding agricultural cycles and spiritual rituals alike. So Stonehenge wasn't just about the stones or the people who built it, but perhaps a way to honor their ancestral roots in an ever-changing world.
There you are, trekking across a desert on foot. It's hot, you're terribly thirsty, and now you gotta walk around this stupid wall. Wait, a wall in the middle of a sandy, lifeless nowhere? Exactly, a wall in the northern Saudi desert. Archaeologists have just made a super exciting discovery, and what they found was not just a single wall. No, it was a whole ancient walled city that might date back to 2400 BCE. They think this place was home to around 500 people and could have been used for 1,000 years. This discovery is groundbreaking. It means that the area could have been way more advanced than anyone expected. The city was well organized, with different zones for living, towers and strong walls for protection, and different sections for all kinds of daily life. This ancient city, now called Al-Natah, was basically an oasis town, and it's great since it can give us a peek into what life might have been like in this desert thousands of years ago. Apparently, they had clearly separated areas, like residential sections, a cemetery, farmland, and even a town center. This oasis city, found in the Khaybar area, is the first big organized settlement from the 2nd or 3rd millennium BCE that researchers have uncovered in northwestern Arabia. The first surveys show that this town, which covered about 6 acres, had several districts, including the residential area, the cemetery, and the legal one, with courts. The houses were set up in neat rows, all connected by small roads. Those streets kept the residential area separate from the rest of the town. Back then, most people in this region were nomadic herders, always moving around. But archaeologists have been sure that during the Bronze Age, northwest Arabia had small walled towns and oasis centers scattered across it. These connected oasis towns were unique, offering secure places for people to live, store goods, and trade. They started showing the beginnings of urban planning, which hints that people of that time were already starting to settle down and organize communities more seriously. The research team estimated that there were about 50 homes in Al-Natah, but that number could go up to 70 as they keep digging. They think that a few hundred people lived there, and probably one of the coolest things is that some houses went up to 3 stories tall. Built on a slope near a couple of major trade routes, this city was set up in a prime spot. Now, one of the most impressive things about this place is its water supply. The oasis had springs and aquifers, which are underground water sources, and such conditions were perfect for farming. Those water sources meant residents could grow their own food, making the town self-sufficient. The outer walls probably helped control who could enter the town and get access to its resources. This settled way of life was an impressive shift from nomadic living to a more agro-pastoral lifestyle, which means a mix of farming and herding animals. Another find that supports this theory is a bunch of tools, like grinding stones, mortars, and pestles, discovered inside the town. People there must have ground grains and prepared food. They had a diet of cereals, meat, and milk from animals they raised themselves. These astonishing findings show that the inhabitants of the town could easily feed themselves and were surprisingly advanced for that time. Thanks to better access to Saudi Arabia in the past couple of decades, archaeologists now have a much clearer picture of what life there was like thousands of years ago. The most exciting thing is that Al-Natah might have been part of a whole network of similar fortified oasis towns spread across the region, and all of these connected sites could show us how trade routes and small settlements worked together at that time in that arid area. Now, at the same time, this recent discovery isn't the only one that has the scientific world buzzing with excitement. How about we visit Egypt and see for ourselves? After all, archaeologists have just found a stash of ancient Egyptian and Greek treasure underwater. They were exploring the lost city of Thonis Heraklion off the coast of Egypt, which sank more than 1,000 years ago. This city was legendary, and nobody even knew where it was until it was rediscovered in 2000. Now they're uncovering more and more, and on this dive, they found a pile of gold and silver treasures. Those were probably used in rituals to bless Egyptian pharaohs when they took the throne. The researchers even found an ancient Greek temple dedicated to Aphrodite and some super old Greek weapons. Frank Gaudio, the lead archaeologist, said it was astonishing that those delicate objects had survived the disaster that brought the city down. Back in its prime, Thonis Heraklion was one of the biggest port cities in the Mediterranean. It was a huge center of social life and was the main entry point for ships from Greece coming into Egypt. But tragically, due to rising waters, earthquakes, and a catastrophic tidal wave, the soil underneath the city literally turned into mush, and then the entire city sank into the Mediterranean. It was forgotten until Gaudio's team found it in 2000. Since then, they've been uncovering new parts of the city and piecing together its history little by little. If a lost underwater city doesn't seem impressive enough, we can travel to the Amazon. The discovery made there is truly mind-boggling. For centuries, people have talked about lost cities deep in the Amazon, like El Dorado, that mythical city of gold that lured Spanish explorers into the jungle. A lot of them never came back. Then, in the 1900s, a British explorer named Percy Fawcett went searching for what he called the lost city of Z, and he too disappeared. But now, finally, scientists have actually found proof that those lost cities in the Amazon were real all along. A team of scientists use a tech called LiDAR, which basically allows you to see through thick jungle from above by bouncing light beams off the ground. They flew over the jungle in Bolivia in a helicopter about 650 feet up and mapped out those hidden ancient cities. What they found were ruins of a huge urban settlement built by the Kasarabi people who lived there from 500 to 1400 CE. And it wasn't just a couple of buildings here and there. No, the LiDAR maps revealed massive urban centers, pyramids, platforms, roads, canals, and causeways, all carefully laid out. Turns out the Amazon wasn't just an untouched jungle. It was once home to big, complex cities. A scientist from the German Archaeological Institute explained that Europeans had long ignored the possibility of ancient Amazonian cities, but the LiDAR maps showed they were wrong. The new maps have revealed 26 sites, including 11 that no one even knew existed. Researchers have discovered two main city sites, Landivar and Kotoka. They had massive moat causeways stretching out like spokes on a wheel, linking the main cities with smaller surrounding settlements. Some of the canals even connected the cities to rivers and a big lake, which allowed water to flow through the area. Over the years, scientists found scattered ruins all over this region, but the thick jungle made it nearly impossible to connect the dots and see if or how they were related. With LiDAR, the whole layout came to life, showing that those sites were part of a much larger, organized urban system. It's now also clear that the sites had a greater meaning, since everything is lined up in a way that could be symbolic of the spiritual beliefs of the inhabitants. The Kasarabi culture isn't as famous as the Maya, but they had a thriving society in an area that faced huge challenges, like yearly flooding. And although the nearby Andes had their own monumental sites, the Kasarabi were doing something absolutely unique. They even had reservoirs to store water, which suggests they might have been dealing with occasional droughts, which is pretty unusual for the Amazon. Actually, those terrible droughts could be why the Kasarabi eventually left their cities around 1400 CE. Stonehenge took approximately 20 million man-hours to build. For comparison, an average human doesn't live much over 700,000 hours. This is Jack, one of the first builders of Stonehenge. Let's say Jack lived to be 80 years old, which is extremely improbable, but it makes it easier for me to crunch the numbers, thanks. If Jack had spent his entire life, from age 0 to age 80, working on the Stonehenge project, it would have required approximately 28.5 generations of people doing the same thing to complete it. That's next to impossible. To make it more plausible, let's multiply that by 2. After all, Jack wouldn't want to dedicate his entire life to moving stones, and he didn't live to be that old. Thus, we arrive at around 57 generations needed to build Stonehenge. That's not enough room on the screen for me to introduce John, Jack's great-great-great-great, you get the drift, grandson. So it all began around 5,000 years ago with just a simple circular earthen bank and ditch. Fast forward to around 26,000 BCE, and the builders replaced that initial structure with a complex arrangement of wooden posts and brought in around 80 dolerite bloom stones from Wales, which were rearranged at least 3 times. Then, a few hundred years later, they added those massive sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons. These enormous sandstone blocks were transported about 19 miles to create a continuous outer circle, with 5 trilithons, 2 upright stones topped with a lintel, forming a horseshoe shape inside. It was a millennium-long building process that demanded years of hard work. So, people must have lived nearby, right? But how would they have found shelter back then? Today, we have houses for builders on site, small accommodations that serve as temporary housing. But structures like this definitely didn't exist when Stonehenge was constructed. Did they? Well, actually, they existed. And some recent archaeological digs near Stonehenge prove it. Archaeologists found this Stone Age eco-home, which is a huge deal since it's one of the earliest settlements in the area. This newly uncovered Mesolithic home dates back to around the year 4300 BCE. Let's take a closer look at this house, shall we? Now, for the walls, people back then used a large fallen tree, its trunk to be more precise. These wooden walls were reinforced with flint, and they even lined the pit left by the uprooted tree with cobblestones. To create the roof, they opted for animal hides, which sounds like a wise choice. They must have provided protection against the unpredictable weather of the British Isles. Now, you might be wondering, the weather in Britain is indeed unpredictable, and it has been that way since time immemorial. So, how did the builders manage throughout most of the year, particularly during the winter months? Well, the answer is simple. There was a hearth on site, which isn't surprising, but the system they employed was quite ingenious. A hearth inside the house would have posed too great a risk, yet bringing hot stones into the dwelling was perfectly safe. While they were hot, they couldn't ignite the building. So they used these stones from the hearth as a heat storage system to keep warm at night. And as a final touch, they even incorporated various stones for decoration. They didn't exactly get a Pinterest house, but it added a touch of elegance for sure. And if you think this discovery is merely about the houses, think again. It significantly changes our understanding of how people lived during that time. This discovery places them in an important prehistoric setting right at the start of the Neolithic area, sparking some interesting questions about whether these early folks could be related to the people who built Stonehenge. But there's a big worry. Experts are concerned that this significant find, along with other buried archaeological sites, could be at risk if the authorities go ahead with plans to build a tunnel to reroute the A303 away from the World Heritage Site. Sure thing the house the scientists found wasn't in perfect shape, and it lacked some crucial elements people use for living. Some of them decayed over time, while others were simply absent. So the scientists took 20 tons of chalk, 5,000 hazel rods, and 3 tons of straw, and used all this to recreate the 4,500-year-old design houses. These new buildings are located close to Stonehenge, which is incredible since in this area, planning permission for even a new cowshed is problematic. So, what are these houses like? Well, first off, there are 4 of them, and they're oval-shaped. They're built on the foundation of real houses that stood there about 4,500 years ago, just around the time the Stonehenge Eco House was going up. The houses aren't very big, they're single-room structures. When it comes to dimensions, it was straightforward to estimate since we could gauge the size of the roof and the height of the walls based on the foundations. Each side measures about 16 feet. However, the roof structure remains a bit of a mystery. There were a few differing thatching techniques back then, so pinpointing the exact method used for these dwellings is kind of a guessing game. For now, we think it involves knotted or tied straw carefully secured onto a hazel-woven frame. When fires are lit, the smoke from the hearth wafts up through the thatched roof. Now, remember those 20 tons of chalk? That was needed for the floors and walls. The white chalk walls and floors reflect sunlight and capture heat from the fire. But here's the kicker. The builders encountered a challenge because the ground was so waterlogged that some of the chalk floors took weeks to dry out. By the time they should have been bone dry, they were still as sticky as chewing gum. Now, it's safe to say people 4,500 years ago faced similar struggles, and we can really appreciate what they went through while building their homes. The final layer of daub was applied using rags, giving a smooth, almost shiny finish that looks surprisingly classy. The interiors are furnished with wooden and wicker beds and shelves, along with clay pots and jars, all centered around a cozy hearth. The spaces feel surprisingly roomy and are filled with light that streams in through the thatched roof, bouncing off those white walls. Plus, the woven furniture adds a nice touch of authenticity to the vibe. The fires have been lit, and the first meal, bread crafted from flour ground on a stone mill next to the hearth, has been prepared. Those who tried the bread were pleasantly surprised by its flavor, finding it quite tasty. Now, here comes the bummer. Those who recreated the houses did cheat a little. While the materials used were authentic, the tools weren't. They used cement mixers to mix the daub, wheelbarrows to transport the timber, and logs by the hearth were split with steel axes instead of stone ones. Still, the builders aren't professionals, they're volunteers. So I think a bit of cheating is totally cool in this case. There are other volunteers on site who are more than happy to chat about the daily activities of the Stonehenge builders, from grinding grain with a quern to making rope from rushes. But these houses and the Eco House aren't the only remarkable things in the Stonehenge area. Some years ago, archaeologists uncovered a burial site close to Stonehenge that predates the monument itself. This Neolithic long barrow, dating back approximately 56 to 5,700 years, likely contains the remains of some of Britain's earliest inhabitants. The burial site was identified through aerial images that revealed its distinct shape beneath the crops. Salisbury Plain is rich with ancient sites, including Stonehenge, various mounds, and monuments. The area has remained undisturbed over the centuries, which is likely why so many ancient structures are still intact. This discovery also shows a significant shift in human lifestyle during that era, marking a transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming and animal husbandry, much like the Eco House itself. The long barrow in question measures about 85 feet long and 65 feet wide, though much of its above-ground structure has been lost to farming over the years. If this site is like others in the vicinity, it contains the remains of 30 to 50 individuals, along with cow skulls, which were significant to those early communities.
In 1936, British Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery found a small object in the desert that made people debate whether it was an elaborate stone model of a flying saucer or even a hyperdrive from a spaceship that belonged to some advanced civilization that visited the Earth. Emery spent years excavating sites along the Nile River Valley, especially in the huge ancient necropolis of Saqqara. He found countless treasures from ancient Egypt, and the most bizarre one was definitely from the tomb of a high official, Sabu. Historians don't know exactly who he was for sure. Some sources say he was a king's son. His burial at Saqqara means he was an important figure in the royal court. There are no records from this early period he lived in, so Sabu's role and fate are still a mystery. Inside his tomb, scientists found 7 funerary chambers, each filled with traditional grave goods: animal bones, flint tools, pottery, ivory objects, and stone bowls. And then there was a strange, broken artifact that became famous as the Disc of Sabu. It resembles a shallow, round-bottomed bowl, but with 3 delicately carved, curved lobes spaced roughly 120 degrees apart around its perimeter. These lobes are separated by 3 holes, and at the center, there's a thin tube. The material used to build the disc is metasiltstone, or schist. This type of rock is fragile, highly porous, and super difficult to carve. It flakes easily and crumbles under pressure. So how they made the disc out of it with rather simple stone and copper tools from 3000 BCE is still a mystery. The next big question is why they decided to bury Sabu with it. Perhaps if we knew its true purpose, it would make more sense. When it was first discovered, archaeologists thought it was nothing more than a vase, an incense burner, or a ceremonial decoration. But those who took a closer look from the point of view of an engineer decided it could actually be a component of a larger mechanism. An amateur historian made an exact copy of the artifact with a 3D printer, and it turned out that the disc of Sabu was an ancient impeller, a crucial part of a centrifugal pump. When they put it in a housing and span at high speeds using the small central shaft, the disc was able to displace water. When it was tested without a housing, the disc created a powerful vortex. It became clear that the curved lobes and slightly concave shape of the disc weren't random. It was probably all engineered to move water with remarkable efficiency, like a powerful pump mechanism. Ancient Egypt's entire civilization depended on irrigation. Later dynasties perfected basin irrigation and managed to control the rise and fall of the Nile to take the most from agriculture. So, the engineers of the first dynasty may have been experimenting with advanced irrigation techniques thousands of years earlier than scientists previously thought. But then again, some people have doubts schist is strong enough to be used for a pumping mechanism. They suggest that artisans from Egypt's first dynasty were trying to recreate an even older object, using whatever tools and materials they had. It could be a stone replica of something originally made from metal, possibly belonging to a civilization far older and more advanced than ancient Egypt itself. One Swiss author takes this idea even further and proposes that the disc is a copy of a component from an extraterrestrial spaceship's hyperdrive, or stone model of a flying saucer. One French researcher believes the disc of Sabu was part of a secret massive factory system to manufacture sodium carbonate inside pyramids. Some people suggest that the disc may have been a primitive tool for weaving ropes. The lobes held strands of silk or fiber that were twisted into twine when it was spun. Or it may have been a gigantic lamp. Another historical mystery is a map from 1513 that is believed to be the oldest surviving detailed map showing the Americas. The author of the map is a Turkish captain, Piri Reis. He never crossed the ocean himself and put together this map from 20 regional maps. He used an Arab map of India, 4 Portuguese maps showing India and China, and a map of America by Christopher Columbus as he saw it. This last map was lost for many years, so Reis's map gave us an idea of what Columbus must have recorded during his third voyage to the New World. A historian who studied the map suggested that it showed Antarctica in prehistoric times because it strangely resembled Antarctica's true coastline, the way it looked when it was free of ice. But it was later proven that this idea wasn't right. Another idea that rocked the science world was Klerksdorp spheres. They were found in deposits of mineral pyrophyllite in South Africa and looked like tiny ancient cricket balls with lines around the middle. Back in the 1980s, there was a theory that some super advanced pre-flood civilization we know nothing about had made these spheres. One journalist shared stories about how they rotated on their own in a display case. There was also a TV show that invited a psychic who was telling everyone the spheres were pieces of an ancient spaceship. But according to geologists, these spheres are pretty regular spherical objects formed from different minerals than the surrounding rock. The seam-like lines on them are just imprints from the host rock's layers building up over time. The Klerksdorp spheres come in different shapes, from flattened spheres to distinct discs. As for that episode when one of these spheres spun on its own, the curator of the Klerksdorp Museum cleared that up too. He said that when he put one sphere on its glass shelf when the journalist came to visit, the sphere rotated a bit because it's round. There are some gold mining activities going on nearby, so the land where the museum stands often experiences earth tremors. In a remote part of China, there are some bizarre pipe-like formations known as the Beigon Pipes. A local explorer found them back in 1996 protruding from Mount Beigon and along the shores of Tosan Lake nearby. Some people thought they were the work of ancient guests from other planets. When scientists tested samples of the pipe material, they found out that they contained mostly common minerals, but there was a mysterious 8% of unknown stuff. Some extra tests showed that these pipes had been there before humans. Chinese geologists later visited the site and suggested that these pipes were formed naturally over time. It was probably fossilized tree roots from the area's super green past. It's still a real mystery with no clear-cut answer. While digging a trench along a river in Romania, workers found a wedge, which is now famous as the aluminum wedge of Ajud, or the object of Ajud. Right next to it, there were some mastodon bones. Those distant relatives of elephants lived 11,000 years ago. So some people concluded the wedge is of the same age. The cool part is that it's made of aluminum, but this metal wasn't discovered until the 1800s. This material requires serious heat to produce. The wedge is said to be covered in a thick layer of oxide that's been sitting there for hundreds of years. Some folks believe this wedge must have crash-landed here on a spacecraft from some other planet. Some scientists think it's all a hoax, and others suppose it might be a human-made object with an unknown purpose. It's like archaeology woke up recently and decided to spice up the news with its history-changing discoveries. From unearthing dinosaur fossils in peaceful Iowa to translating bad news from ancient Babylonian texts, history is revealing its secrets like never before. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, it froze the town in time. Some of the most famous discoveries were heartbreaking, like a mother wearing a golden bracelet, holding her child, or two sisters hugging in fear. At least that's what scientists thought. In 2024, advanced DNA tests shattered these long-held beliefs. The mother from the House of the Golden Bracelet was actually a man wearing a fancy 30-carat bracelet, and the child wasn't even related to him. As for the two sisters, DNA revealed one was actually a man, while the other remains a mystery. Some speculate they were lovers, but the truth is still buried in time. Speaking of rewriting history, another shocking revelation comes from ancient Babylon. Recently, archaeologists translated 4,000-year-old texts that turned out to be heralds of terrible news. These specific texts that were translated are believed to be from Sippar, a city near the Euphrates River in modern Iraq. They talked about lunar eclipses, which is when the Earth's shadow blocks the moon, and for ancient Babylonians, these were warnings. Eclipses could mean everything from floods and famines to chaos in the kingdom. But here's the interesting twist. Babylonians also came up with clever ways to cancel these bad omens, like calling in priests to perform rituals, or consulting oracles for advice. These ancient astrologers took their job seriously, since it wasn't just about stargazing. It was about keeping the kingdom safe. Augustus was the first Roman emperor, so we can say he was a big deal. Archaeologists have already found ruins of the villas where he partied, but now they think they've found his final resting place. In a place near Naples, they found an old structure buried under a villa. They found the equivalent of a modern heating system, something that was probably used to draw warm baths. They also found shelves filled with ancient jars, suggesting the site later became a temple. They're still not sure this was Augustus's last home, but if confirmed, this would be a big deal for world history. While ancient Rome is surprising us, the famous Nazca lines in Peru are also revealing hidden details. These massive geoglyphs, created thousands of years ago, have only been partially studied until now. Scientists trained artificial intelligence to help them scan 243 miles of terrain. With AI's help, they identified over 300 new motifs, including llamas, stick figure people, and strange heads. The algorithm, originally developed to decode charred scrolls from Mount Vesuvius, has doubled the number of known glyphs. The past is getting a serious digital upgrade. Meanwhile, in Bulgaria, archaeologists made a surprising discovery in a place few would expect: a sewer. In 2024, researchers unearthed a nearly intact 6.8-foot-tall marble statue of Hermes, the Greek god of travelers and trade, hidden beneath layers of soil. Experts believe it was placed there for safekeeping after an earthquake in 383 CE damaged the city's infrastructure. At that time, paganism was declining and Christianity was rising as the Roman Empire's official religion. Many pagan idols were being destroyed, but it seems some locals secretly preserved their deities by hiding them underground. Searching the bottom of the River Thames is probably worse than looking under your bed. The riverbed collects all kinds of discarded treasures, including a legendary typeface. In the early 1900s, two men created the Doves typeface for printing books, but after a bitter falling out, one of them threw every single metal letter into the river. A century later, in 2014, a designer trying to revive the typeface began searching for the lost letters. In just 20 minutes, he started finding them. With the help of divers, more were uncovered, and today, some of the lost letters are on display in a museum. Not much goes on in Iowa, which is why finding a huge 13,000-year-old mastodon skeleton made headlines. In 2022, a researcher received a photo of a massive femur believed to belong to a prehistoric animal. It took 2 years to secure funding for excavation, but in 2024, archaeologists finally dug in. After 12 days of work, they uncovered a well-preserved mastodon skull, the first ever found in a Midwestern state. This discovery would make Indiana Jones jealous, especially since it happened in Petra, the ancient Jordanian city featured in one of the movies. Archaeologists uncovered a 2,000-year-old chamber beneath Petra's treasury, containing at least 12 skeletons, along with iron and bronze artifacts. The chamber, built by the Nabateans, sheds new light on their afterlife practices, which remain largely mysterious. One of the most intriguing finds was a ceramic chalice clutched by one of the skeletons. Back in Peru, archaeologists made a groundbreaking discovery that turned Peruvian history upside down: a female ruler. At the 1,600-year-old site of Pañamarca, scientists uncovered a throne room decorated with colorful murals. These murals depict women spinning and weaving, men carrying a crown, and even a crowned woman speaking to a birdman. The discovery suggests that Moche women weren't just spiritual leaders, but rather had real political power too. Tiny houses are mainly a modern thing, but archaeologists think they found one in ancient Pompeii. Unlike traditional Roman homes, which had grand atriums for entertaining guests, this house had none. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in artistry. Inside, scientists found a painted altar decorated with birds of prey, sparrows, snakes, and plants. The altar held ceremonial items like a lamp and an incense burner, still holding traces of fragrant herbs. In 2021, researchers scanning the Baltic Sea found a massive stone wall hidden beneath the waves. The Blinker Wall, stretching over 1.5 miles, could be Europe's oldest man-made structure. Sitting 68 feet below the surface, it's built from around 1,400 small stones placed between 300 giant boulders, some weighing up to 142 tons. Dating back over 10,000 years, the Blinker Wall predates Stonehenge and France's Karnak stones, meaning it was likely built when the area was dry land. Scientists believe it may have been a reindeer hunting tool, guiding animals into a lake where hunters could strike. Oh, and then there's the granite slab that was found in Egypt's Abydos area. At first, it was thought to belong to 2 important people from ancient Egypt, but a recent discovery showed it was actually part of the sarcophagus of Pharaoh Ramses II, one of the most famous Egyptian rulers. A researcher found a special engraving on the slab that had Ramses II's name on it. Ramses ruled Egypt a long time ago, and after he died, his tomb was looted, so his body and belongings were moved around a few times. This new discovery shows that after Ramses' tomb was robbed, some of his things were used again. The finding also teaches us that ancient Egyptian tombs were often looted, and the things in them were reused. Recently, something unexpected happened during a dig in Norton Disney, back in England. While searching for ancient coins and brooches, a volunteer from the Norton Disney History and Archaeology group stumbled upon a mysterious Roman dodecahedron. This small hollow object, made of copper alloy with 12 pentagonal sides, was buried for 1,700 years, but was surprisingly well preserved. Though over 30 of these strange objects have been found in the UK, no one knows for sure what they were used for. Some think they might have been measuring tools or calendars, while others believe they were used for rituals. The Norton Disney Group thinks these dodecahedra were likely symbols for religious ceremonies, as many show no signs of wear from daily use.
Hey, you've heard of Stonehenge? Of course you have. Big rocks mysteriously mounted in circles on a plain in England by, somebody. But what if England's Stonehenge is only a replica of another monument, and its builders just crossed the Atlantic and copied what someone had already done elsewhere? Well, it turns out researchers found another Stonehenge underneath the waters of Lake Michigan. This lake is a hotspot for woo-woo unexplained things. A bunch of disappearances, plane crashes, and now this, an ancient underwater monument that looks strangely enough like Stonehenge. We couldn't help ourselves and needed to dive deep into this story. A ring of massive stones, arranged in a way that felt all too familiar. They saw two circles, an outer one and an inner one, sitting 40 feet below the surface. But this wasn't just a random pile of rocks. These stones had been placed there, purposefully, by human hands. And by doing some further research, they discovered that they were staring at a structure that's over 9,000 years old. Think about it. This Stonehenge beneath Lake Michigan predates the pyramids. It predates Stonehenge itself by about 4,000 years. All of this information was enough to startle scientists at Northwestern Michigan University. But that was before they found this out. One of the stones had a carving, a faint but clear petroglyph of a mastodon. Mastodons kind of look like the ancestors to our modern-day elephants, but they have been extinct on planet Earth since 10,000 years ago. So, whoever built this underwater Stonehenge needed to be alive at the same time these creatures roamed our planet. This discovery raised many questions among scientists. I mean, why on Earth would they go through all this trouble to lay rocks at the bottom of a lake? Well, first things first. Scientists believe that Lake Michigan had much less water back then than it does now. Second, it could have something to do with ancestral practices of First Nation people. There's one theory from a professor of the University of Michigan. He suggested that the stones formed a kind of prehistoric hunting trap. He believes that early hunters used the circular formation as a drive lane to herd large animals like the mastodons from the rock carvings we were just talking about. Once they got these huge animals into a tighter circle, they could be more easily hunted. But not everyone's convinced by this theory. Some believe the circle probably had a deeper spiritual purpose. According to local Native American tribes, like the Anishinaabe, stones are more than just rocks. They're living beings. They hold spiritual energy and represent a connection to the earth and all living creatures. An elder from the Anishinaabe community even suggested that these stones are sacred, placed there by their ancestors to honor the land and its creatures. Scientists are trying to study the stone formation in depth, like about 40 feet. But that's the problem, actually. The fact that it's underwater makes it super difficult, since they don't have the best technology. Traditional archaeological tools don't work as well when everything is submerged, but promising new technologies like stereophotogrammetry, which literally means making 3D models of a site, are helping scientists study the stone circle more closely. Still, research is slow and expensive, so it's hard to know when this mystery will come to a close. As we said, Lake Michigan is a hot spot for unexplained phenomena. Its lakebed is filled with shipwrecks, such as the Thomas Hume, a sturdy American schooner. It also collects debris from airplanes that have suddenly gone missing while flying the area, such as Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 that disappeared in the 1950s. Some people even call the area the Lake Michigan Triangle, suggesting paranormal activities like what happens in the Bermuda Triangle might be going on. The lake spans over 22,000 square miles, which means it's almost two-thirds the size of the country of Ireland. In 2024, scientists were able to access another one of Lake Michigan's mysteries, the wreck of the Margaret A. Muir schooner. This 130-foot-long sailing ship sank over 130 years ago. The discovery was announced just recently by the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeological Association, the WUAA, whose team found the shipwreck sitting 50 feet below the surface just off the shores of Algoma, Wisconsin. Built in 1872, the Margaret A. Muir was a three-masted schooner built to carry heavy cargo across the Great Lakes. Her final voyage started out as a routine trip. Loaded with bulk salt, the ship left Bay City, Michigan, heading for South Chicago, Illinois. But on September 30, 1893, things took a bad turn. Just as the Muir approached the town of Anomalous, now known as Algoma, a sudden storm hit. The ship began taking on water fast. The captain of the boat ordered his crew to abandon ship, and thankfully, they all made it to shore safely. For more than a century, the wreck sat undisturbed on the lake bed, its location a mystery. But thanks to a combination of historical research and high-resolution sonar, WUAA searchers finally found her in May of last year. The wreck is remarkably well preserved, with parts of the deck and gear still visible. Well, just a few lakes over to the left, researchers uncovered another impressive thing. At the bottom of Lake Mendota, near Madison, Wisconsin, researchers found 11 ancient canoes. They believe the oldest of the canoes dates all the way back to 2500 BCE. Now, if you don't get why that's important, it's because you're thinking with today's head. If in a classic Midwest highway you see a bunch of pickups, then back in the ancient days you see only canoes. They were the main mode of transportation for indigenous cultures. They were used to fish in deep waters, trade goods, and travel long distances. The reason why scientists were so excited with this discovery is because they had never found any proof of what canoes were being used for in this region back then. And to understand the local cultures that inhabited the area during this time period, they needed to have some information on that. This exciting discovery was announced by the Wisconsin Historical Society in May 2024. The first canoe, which they believe is around 1,200 years old, was pulled from the lake in 2021. Then a second one was dug up in 2022. And now divers have found at least 11 more canoes along what would have been an ancient shoreline, long since submerged. One theory is that these canoes were intentionally sunk to keep them from freezing or warping in winter. It's possible people stored them in the same spot for generations. Or maybe this is just a small part of a much bigger settlement. Historians do believe there could be an ancient village hidden under the water of the lake. Divers have already found stone tools, like net sinkers used for fishing, but the village itself hasn't been located yet. Truth is, while the Great Lakes often steal all the thunder, scientists point out that smaller lakes like Mendota have stories too. The Wisconsin Historical Society is working closely with Native nations to piece together more about the lake's history. You'll need to believe me when I say there is a third Stonehenge, all the way under the waters of Lake Constance, Switzerland. I mean, think of it like Stonehenge's cousin. Archaeologists began to discover this back in 2015, when they found a line of 170 man-made stone cairns under the lake. Scientists say this was most likely the work of several villages, and that the cairn site was probably used for some collective purpose because, well, the formations are huge. Some of them are several dozen feet wide, and they can build up to 6 feet. The most amazing discovery so far is that the site dates back to around 5,500 years ago. So around the time the original Stonehenge was being built. Some of the facts that link them together are their construction dates, as well as the distinct characteristic of stone monuments built in a circular format. Scientists don't know much about this site yet, but hey, I see a pattern manifested all over the world. Don't you?